Part 2. The speaking part 2 is called the long turn. The long turn is an area where you are expected to give a speech between 1 to 2 minutes on any given topic or any given question that will be assigned to you from a cue card. This is probably the most significant aspect of the speaking test in the IELTS. And why is this? It is the place where you have complete control over the whole testing process. The examiner will not interrupt you with questions. The examiner will also give you a whole 1 minute to prepare your answers for what you want to say. And at the end of the test, the examiner will now ask you follow-up questions as you are timed for the speech that you are going to be giving. This shows that at this part, you are given complete control over the whole process. And this is a part where you can actually show off your language skills to the maximum. This is a part where I always advise test takers to put a lot of focus on and to prepare for adequately. It is also one of the easiest aspects in the IELTS to prepare for. And how is this? Anybody can take a phone, as we all have phones nowadays, and do a 1 minute or 2 minute recording on any social media app like WhatsApp, or even on a voice recorder on your phone. You can Google a sample speaking question for the speaking part 2 and record yourself and send it to an examiner or send it to someone who is an accountability partner for you to help you assess it. Or you can even listen to it by yourself to pick out the areas where you feel you can actually improve, or the areas where you feel that you're not doing so well. So please, you have no excuse for not practicing for the speaking part 2. So what is the structure of the speaking part 2 called the long turn in the IELTS? It is a 3 minute task. 3 minutes, the first minute starts by you looking at a question card called the cue card. You will be given a cue card by the examiner, and you will be told that you have between 1 minute to prepare notes for what you want to say. Please do not disregard this. At this point in time where you're given 1 minute, do use that 1 minute to jot down the notes on what you were going to say. Prepare your points. Make a plan before you answer. This is a very, very important tip. Always make a plan in the speaking part 2 before you answer the questions. I have seen a lot of people get cue cards that contain questions that are quite easy. And the first thing that comes to their mind is, oh, I can talk about this in 1 minute. I can talk about this in 2 minutes. And they just go ahead and they start talking. And what happens to them is that they forget either 1 or 2 of the prompts that are embedded in the cue card, and they do not cover it. And if you do this, chances are that you have already failed the speaking test. Now let's move on. Your cue card contains a question, a sentence that sets up the question. For example, I will read a cue card that I have in front of me. It says, describe a museum that you have visited. That is the sentence that sets up the question. Describe a museum that you have visited. Then it goes further. It says, you should say where it is, why you went there, and what you particularly remember about the place. Where it is, why you went there, and what you particularly remember about the place. Those 3 prompts that are underneath the question itself are the most significant aspects of the question. So, if your 2 minute talk fails to touch any one of the 3 prompts on that question paper, you will be considered to have not fully responded to the task, and that is setting yourself up for failure, which means that you must cover all those prompts. So what are the things that you must do? What are the do's for the speaking part 2 of the IELTS? The first one, like I mentioned earlier, is to take notes. Take notes. The 1 minute that will be given to you to take notes and to prepare for your speech, please do not ignore it. Take notes, no matter how easy the question is. Let me give you a classic example of how easy the question could be. Imagine a doctor taking the IELTS, and you get into the speaking test, and the cue card that is given to you is describe what to do before an operation, before a surgery. Describe what to do before a surgery. Now, you are a doctor. You just finished performing a surgery before you came for the test. Do not start your talk if you haven't made some notes. That is how important making the notes or making a plan before you start your speech is. Never ever gamble that you will remember every point that you need to talk about. It is a gamble that you do not want to take. So, In addition to that, when you're making your notes, please write keywords. I'll take that again. Write keywords. Do not write your notes. Do not make your points in sentences. Why is this? If you write full sentences, two things are happening to you. One, you're wasting the significant time in your 1 minute. You have just 1 minute to jot down your points. Writing long sentences will eat into your 1 minute, and you might not be able to complete your plan before the end of the 1 minute. That's the first one. The second thing is this: if you write down a full sentence, remember at the end of your notes that you've taken before you start your 2 minute talk, the examiner has the discretion. It has the examiner's discretion to either collect the cue card back from you or leave it with you. Most 8 out of 10, the examiner collects the question back from you, and you're only left with your notes that you have jotted. So do not depend on the questions. A lot of people depend on the questions. They want to hold the questions when they are responding. And I always tell them, this is something that you cannot guarantee will happen in the IELTS. So the only thing that you can guarantee is that the notes that you have written will be left with you. If you have your notes with you and you've written full sentences, for the part where they said where it is and you've written the museum is in Las Vegas, what you will say when you start your speech is the museum is in Las Vegas. And when you get to the end of that sentence at the full stop, your brain will momentarily shut down, and it will take you another 2 to 3 seconds before it boots up again and brings up another sentence to expand that sentence that you've given. Which is why the easiest way to do that is when I'm making my notes for that question, where it is, I would just put Las Vegas. Why you went there, excursion. What to particularly remember about the place, the Egyptian statues. If I put those keywords there and I look at them when I'm talking, it is easier for the word Las Vegas to sink into my mind, and my mind to provide more information for me to expand all I know about the museum in Las Vegas, as opposed to me writing down a full sentence which I will read out and then I will stop because I do not have extra information to add to it. So please take notes, but write down keywords. Write them in shorthand, write them in any form that you want, but do not write long sentences. The next tip that you need to do is to cover every point. I've mentioned this earlier. In your 2 minute speech, ensure that you cover all the prompts that are on the cue card. Failure to do this is an assurance of failure. The next point is this: when you are answering the questions, please endeavor to move from point to point. Now, there are different schools of thought on this. Some people say that you should answer the questions in the sequence in which the prompts are listed on the question. Others say that you can choose to answer in any order that you want. You can choose the last prompt and answer that first before you move to the first one. But what I will tell you is this: choosing not to answer in the sequence in which the prompts are on the question will tax your speaking skills more. You can only do that if you are a much more competent user of the language, as opposed to someone who is just a beginner. So if you're a beginner, or if you're someone who knows that their language skills is not as competent or is not as developed enough, please do not attempt to go through the part where you do an episodic sequence for your answer. Instead, just do a chronological sequence where you start from the beginning and you move to the end. The next thing that you want to do is this. The next thing that you should do is use personal experiences. And what do I mean by that? Use personal experiences to expand your answer. 2 minutes is a very long time to talk for. Even for native speakers of the English language, 2 minutes might be a challenge for people to speak for. So, for you who are a non-native user of the English language, it might be much more challenging to speak for 2 minutes. In fact, 1 minute is even quite a long time to speak continuously. So you need to, as much as possible, find a way to embed a lot of personal experiences or expansion or illustration into your speech so that you will be able to talk for the allotted time. Remember, one of the worst things that could happen to you is for you to run out of what to say before the time elapses. For example, you are given 2 minutes to talk, and at the end of 58 seconds, you're done. and then the examiner looks at you and tells you to go on, or signals for you to continue, and then you're looking at the examiner because you have nothing else to say. It is one of the worst things that could happen to you in the IELTS test, because it kills your confidence immediately as you start feeling that you might have failed the test. So you want to prepare beforehand by adding a lot of personal experiences or illustrations to your brainstorm, to your notes that you've jotted before you start your speech. Next thing that you need to do is to find a way to expand your answers. A way of expanding your answer is adding personal experiences, like I mentioned. You can also lie. Please, as much as possible, a lot of people have some moral compulsions about lying in the IELTS. And I will advise you that if you are one of those who feels moralistic about lying in the IELTS, then you should have a lot of real personal experiences to use to expand your answers. But because this is quite impossible for any normal person to do, you might still have to depend on fictional stories that you will cook up, but that align with the message that you're trying to pass across. Expand your answers using the senses. What do I mean by that? There are 5 senses. Our sense of sight, smell, taste, touch, and I've forgotten that, the last one, that will be hearing. Sorry. And you see, all these senses are areas that you can use to expand. So for example, you were asked the question, what you particularly remember about the museum. I could start by describing the experiences that I know that I went through there, or that I encountered when I was at the museum, using all of my senses as entry points. So for example, I could say one of the most important things that I remember about it was the beautiful colors that I saw. I also experienced some really lovely smells or interesting smells, and then touching the statues was quite an interesting experience, as they were very, very rough. And the last thing that I particularly remember was hearing the sound of the statues when they were moved. They sounded like a cry from the bottom of the ocean. Now, I have touched on all the 5 senses, and this has given me areas to enter into the speech or expand what I am saying. Using the 5 senses as a means of expansion is a very, very easy thing to do, and it's something that you might want to practice before the day of the test. The next thing that you should do is to organize your speech. Organize your speech. What do I mean by that? Create an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. What's your introduction? I always advise that you start with a hook. What's the hook? A hook is just a statement that sets the context for what you want to talk about. So the question says, describe a museum that you have visited. Instead of just starting by saying, a museum I remember visiting is the one at Las Vegas, that might be too abrupt for an answer. I would start off with a hook by saying that museums are places where historical artifacts are kept. And for me, as a student of history, I love visiting places like that. A particular one that I remember is the museum in Las Vegas. That's a much more smoother way of starting my speech than by just jumping into it in an abrupt manner. So, organize your speech, start with an introduction which contains the hook, and then move into the body of the speech itself, which is answering all the prompts, and then run into the conclusion. The conclusion would be something like, and this is why I particularly remember Las Vegas Museum, because it is one of the most memorable experiences that I've ever had in my life. That is a concluding statement that wraps up my whole speech. All these are things that you do in the 1 minute when you are making notes or brainstorming the points for your speech. Endeavor to use this structure, as it keeps you organized and it keeps everything that you're going to say aligned to a particular purpose. One of the easiest mistakes to make in the speaking test is to talk out of context or to digress away from the focus of your speech. Do not make that mistake. The next thing that you want to do is to use introductory phrases. Use introductory phrases by saying, like, I want to talk about. Right now, I will be talking about, I will share an experience that I had at a museum So using those introductory phrases will signal to the examiner that you are about to begin. And finally, use transitions. Transition words are words that connect the different parts of your speech. always use transition words to show the examiner, to signpost to the examiner that you're moving to another prompt, or you're moving to another prompt. One other thing that you need to know is this, and this has to do with the timing for the IELTS. You are expected to give a speech between 1 to 2 minutes. You will not be wearing a watch, so you would not be able to time yourself or know if you are exceeding the time or you're getting close to the end of the time. So how do you pace yourself for this? Here's a very easy strategy. I always advise that you answer all the prompts, that you give direct answers to all the prompts in the question paper in the first 45 to 50 seconds. I'll take that again. Ensure that you give direct answers to all the prompts in the cue card in the first 45 to 50 seconds. Once you do this, then you can take a deep breath, or you can pause for a couple of seconds. It's called the pregnant pause. The pregnant pause is just a part that shows the examiner that you are through with answering the main part of the question. And then you now pick a particular prompt from all the cue card. That is one of the 3 prompts there. Pick one of it and then expand by sharing a personal experience or a story related to it. Now, at the time when you're sharing your personal experience or story, chances are that you will be talking from a point of confidence, from a point where it is easy for you, as an experience that has happened to you before, and you will be able to make up the remaining 1 minute or 1 minute 10 seconds or 1 minute 20 seconds to complete your 2 minutes. Now, if your examiner now stops you or interrupts you or cuts you short in the midst of that story, no foul, because at that point in time, the only thing that you're doing is you're giving supporting details to the main information that you have given before. What you do not want to do is to have the examiner cut you short or interrupt you when you are answering one of those particular prompts on the cue card. You should, as much as possible, endeavor to answer all the important prompts on the cue card before you start expanding, so that you will not be cut short or you will not be stopped abruptly when you are still on an important point. So always use the 45 to 50 second rule, which is answer all the main prompts in the first 45 to 50 seconds, take a deep breath or take a pregnant pause, pick one of the prompts on the cue card and expand it by sharing a personal experience or a story to buttress it. And that is the way to deal with the speaking test in the IELTS. And finally, please speak loudly. I see this happen to a lot of people where they get into the exam hall and they use their bedroom voice or they use their inside voice. Please, the IELTS is a place where you need to be as audible as possible. Your speaking test is recorded, so you do not want to mumble and what you're saying cannot be heard in the recording. This is also important if you are going to call for a remark, as they would listen to what you've said. Calling for a remark when you are not audible and nobody can hear what you're saying is just setting yourself up for more grief. So please, as much as possible, speak up, speak loudly, and be as audible and clear as possible. So what are the things that you should not do? What are your don'ts for the speaking part 2 or the long turn in the IELTS? The first one is this: do not memorize answers. I have seen a lot of test takers ask me this question, and they say, Mr. Lanre, if I have a wide range of practice materials for the speaking test and I can practice all the part 2 in all of those materials, can I predict what type of question would come out? A lot of us go online, we go to all these websites and they tell you that for December 2020, these are the proposed speaking tests. And then you see candidates pick those speaking tests and they start cramming answers or memorizing answers for them. I would advise you, and I would tell you clearly today, that nobody can predict the questions that will come out in an IELTS test. Nobody. If anybody has given you assurance that they have the preset questions for the speaking test in the IELTS, just laugh and tell them thank you. You can use the questions to practice, but do not put so much faith in them that you cram those answers or you memorize those answers and think that you would get into the speaking test and deliver them. This is one thing that happens. Your examiner is a trained professional who has been trained to detect all those memorized answers. And a memorized answer will definitely not come off as a natural, continuous flow of utterances. So why do it? Don't. The next thing that you should not do is to write too much when you're making your notes or when you're jotting your notes for your speech. I've told you this earlier. Do not write long sentences. Please endeavor to write just one word or phrases, short phrases between 2 to 3 words, or just one word answers or one word prompts. Next thing that you should not do is to panic. A lot of people find it easier to deal with the test when it is a give and take situation, where it's a conversation where the examiner asks them a question and then they answer. But once it gets to a point where they are expected to speak at length for 2 minutes, they start panicking. Don't panic. Fear is the mind killer. Fear will only reduce the quality of your performance. So even if you do not know what to say, panic is not going to help in any way. It is better to face it head on with a confidence that even belies or that even deceives the examiner that you do know what to say. Please, as much as possible, panic is not an option at all. The next thing that you should not do is to focus on one point. Remember, for you to achieve maximum scores for task response in your speaking part 2, you need to answer all the questions. You need to deal with all the prompts. You need to deal with all the prompts on your cue card. Focusing on one point to the detriment of others will not only set you up for failure, it will also significantly drop your scores for the IELTS. Next, do not use boring words. What are boring words? Do not keep on repeating the same vocabulary elements or items for your speech. Remember, your speaking part 2 is most likely going to be you describing an object, a place, a person, or a concept. And in this speech, you are most likely going to be using some peculiar words or peculiar expressions that are particular to that particular thing that you're talking about. So find synonyms for them. Do not use boring words. Instead of using words like good or bad, find replacements for them that convey exactly what you want to say. There are varying nuances or shades of meaning in English language, and you would do well to explore them before you go for your speaking test. Also, do not give short answers. Short answers obviously will set you up for failure. If you were expected to speak for 2 minutes to 1 minute and you're giving short answers, a normal short answer will probably not extend beyond 20 to 15 seconds. And this is not what we need for the speaking test in the IELTS. Do not go off topic. Stay on track. Stay on track and stay on track. I see a lot of people go off topic, especially when they want to use their personal experiences to expand their points. When they get to that expansion point, that is where a lot of people go off topic. Train yourself, practice, discipline yourself to stay on track. Even if the topic is a topic that is quite difficult for you to talk about, stay on track. Remember, you do not need to have so much specialist knowledge or in-depth knowledge about what you need to talk about. All you need to do is to have 1 or 2 strong points and then expand those. Finally, do not worry about your accent. I've mentioned this earlier at the beginning of this test, and I'll say it again. Accent is a natural condition. It is derived from your cultural background or cultural experiences. The 4 weeks or 8 weeks that you have to prepare for the IELTS test is not enough for you to overhaul your accent and change it to that of Queen's English or the standard British accent. No. So your accent is not assessed in the IELTS. What is assessed is your pronunciation. So you can go ahead and have an atrocious accent as long as the things that you're saying are clearly understandable and audible enough. You will still have a high chance of passing in the IELTS. In the next couple of seconds, we'll move to the speaking part 3 section of the IELTS, and here we will also look at the structure and we'll also look at the do's and the don'ts for the speaking part 3 in the IELTS.